Have you ever felt like you're always putting the needs of others before your own? That no matter how hard you try, there's never time left to take care of yourself? If so, you're not alone. The truth is that we live in a society that teaches us to value sacrifice, to please others, and to put our own feelings aside. But the big question is, until when? Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychologists in history, left us a powerful lesson. Emotional healing begins when we learn to prioritize ourselves. It sounds simple, but this change requires courage. Because when you put yourself first, you will inevitably have to face truths that you have avoided for too long. Imagine living a life where you don't feel constantly burned out, where you don't have to carry the weight of other people's expectations, and where you can finally be your authentic selves. This transformation is possible, but it only happens when you decide to take the first step. In this video, we'll explore why prioritizing yourself isn't selfishness, but an essential necessity for your emotional healing. You will understand how Jung's teachings can help you rescue your inner strength and free yourself from the emotional ties that prevent you from living fully. So, if you want to learn how to start this transformation journey, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Now, let's dive into this concept and find out why this change is so important. From a young age, we learn that we should be good to others, help whenever possible, and put the needs of others before our own. This idea seems noble. After all, who doesn't want to be a good person? The problem arises when this attitude becomes an automatic pattern, leading us to forget ourselves in the process. What few realize is that this tendency to cancel oneself out can have much deeper roots than simply wanting to do good. Carl Jung believed that within each of us there are hidden parts, repressed over time, that influence our choices without us realizing it. Often, this uncontrollable desire to please others does not come from love, but from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of not being accepted, fear of being judged. By constantly prioritizing external needs, we end up neglecting what we really feel and desire. And this comes at a price. When you spend your life trying to meet expectations that aren't even yours, you feel a void that nothing seems to fill. Emotional exhaustion sets in, relationships become a burden, and at some point, that feeling of being lost arises. You look in the mirror and no longer recognize who you are. What happened to your dreams? With your wishes? With that version of yourself that one day you believed could be free? The path to healing begins when you decide to break this cycle. And that decision is not about rejecting others or becoming selfish, but rather about reclaiming the right to exist fully. Because the truth is that you can't give what you don't have. He can only offer genuine love when he first learns to love himself. You can only really support someone when you are standing on your own 2 feet. But how to start this change? How to transform this deep-rooted mentality and take the first step towards a more authentic life? The answer lies in a powerful concept that Jung explored in his studies, something that could completely revolutionize the way you see yourself. Within each of us there is a duality, the person we show to the world and the one we often hide even from ourselves. Jung called this hidden part the shadow, a set of feelings, desires, and traumas that we repress throughout life. And as much as we try to ignore it, it is still there, influencing our choices and emotions. If you feel guilty about saying no, if you constantly put yourself on the back burner, or have a hard time setting boundaries, it could be that your shadow is operating silently. Perhaps, at some point, you have learned that being loved means being useful, that to be accepted you need to give up your desires or that your emotions are not as important as those of others. But what happens when this repressed part begins to manifest itself? Generally, the signs appear in the form of exhaustion, irritability, and that feeling that something is always missing. You may even try to ignore it, but sooner or later, your mind and body charge this accumulation of unexpressed emotions. And it is at this point that many people realize that they can no longer continue at the same pace. What once seemed like just an effort to maintain external harmony begins to turn into an unsustainable internal conflict. The good news is that this shadow doesn't have to be a burden. In fact, when you learn to recognize and integrate it, you discover a power that once seemed inaccessible. Jung believed that facing this hidden part is what makes us truly whole. But how to do this in practice? How to transform this awareness into a real change in your daily life? The answer lies in an essential attitude, which can completely redefine your journey of self-knowledge and emotional healing. The first step towards this transformation is self-acceptance. It sounds simple, but in reality, it is one of the biggest challenges of self-knowledge. That's because we've been conditioned to hide our weaknesses, ignore our deepest emotions, and maintain an image that appeals to others. The problem is that by denying parts of yourself, you disconnect from your own essence and live under a mask that doesn't reflect who you really are. Jung teaches us that emotional healing happens when we stop fighting ourselves. Instead of rejecting your shadow, you need to accept and understand it. This means looking at your insecurities without guilt, acknowledging your desires without shame, and welcoming your emotions without fear. Only in this way is it possible to transform what today seems like a burden into a path to growth. Self-acceptance is not about conforming or justifying harmful behaviors, but rather about recognizing who you really are and working to become the best version of yourself. When you take this stance, something amazing happens. The need to please others begins to fade, the guilt for prioritizing your well-being diminishes, and you finally feel free to live according to your own values. But that doesn't mean the road will be easy. On the contrary, accepting oneself takes courage. You will need to face limiting beliefs, challenge old patterns, and, often, let go of relationships and situations that no longer make sense in your life. This journey can be uncomfortable, but it is also deeply liberating. And to take this step safely, it is essential to understand how to reconstruct your identity authentically, without fear of external judgment. This is the next fundamental point for your emotional healing. Reconstructing your identity authentically is a process of rediscovery. For years, you may have lived up to external expectations, shaping your personality to fit what others expected of you. But now the time has come to ask yourself, who am I, beyond the obligations, beyond the labels that have been imposed on me? This is one of the most powerful reflections of the emotional healing journey. When you start prioritizing yourself, you realize that many of the choices you have made have not come from a genuine desire, but rather from the need for acceptance. The career you pursued, the relationships you maintained, the behaviors you adopted, all of these may have been influenced by patterns that didn't always reflect your true essence. Jung believed that individuation, that is, the process of becoming who you really are, only happens when you let go of these ties and begin to live in a way that aligns with your authenticity. This means allowing yourself to question old certainties, test new paths, and, above all, respect your intuition. But this transformation does not happen overnight. It often involves discomfort, resistance, and even the fear of being rejected. It is common for some people around you not to understand your changes and try to get you back to the role you have always played. This is a crucial test. Are you willing to follow your truth, even when it means displeasing others? The answer to that question defines how far you are willing to go in your own evolution. And to sustain this new identity without giving in to external pressure, it is essential to develop a strong internal pillar, based on self-confidence and clarity of your purpose. This is the essential next step for your transformation. Developing a strong internal pillar is what allows you to sustain this transformation without giving in to external pressure. For a long time, you may have sought validation from others, measuring your worth based on the acceptance of others. But to live authentically, it is essential to build a solid foundation within yourself, where your self-esteem and self-confidence no longer depend on the external gaze. Self-confidence doesn't come out of nowhere, it's built through small, daily choices. Every time you set a healthy boundary, every time you say no without guilt, every time you allow yourself to follow your own desires, you reinforce the idea that you are capable of leading your own life. This process, although challenging, is what strengthens your identity and gives you the necessary security to stand firm in the face of difficulties. But there is a crucial detail. To sustain this new version of yourself, you need to learn to deal with fear and uncertainty. Often, as you move away from old patterns, you will feel an emptiness, as if you are leaving something behind. And, in a way, it is. He is abandoning the role he has played for so long, which can generate insecurity. However, it is exactly in this space of uncertainty that growth happens. Jung teaches us that true emotional balance does not come from avoiding discomfort, but rather from facing it consciously. When you understand that the fear of change is part of the process, it loses its strength. You don't need to have all the answers right now, you don't need to know exactly where you're going, you just have to be willing to keep choosing yourself, day after day. And it is at this point that emotional healing begins to manifest. Gradually, you realize that you no longer need to prove yourself to anyone, that your inner peace cannot be negotiated, and that life becomes much lighter when you allow yourself to be who you really are. But for this transformation to be lasting, there is one last fundamental step, something that can consolidate everything you have learned so far and ensure that this change is permanent. True emotional healing does not happen in a single moment, but rather in an ongoing process of daily choices. Each time you decide to prioritize yourself, acknowledge your feelings without guilt, and choose to act according to your authenticity, you strengthen your transformation. And this is the essential point. Change needs to be sustained over time to become permanent. Many people start this journey, but end up giving up when they face resistance, whether internal in the form of insecurity and self-sabotage, or external in the pressure of those who would like them to stay the same. What sets those who truly heal emotionally apart is the ability to stand their ground, even when the path seems challenging. This means being willing to adjust routes, learn from mistakes, and move forward without getting caught up in the past. The transformation that Jung proposes is not about becoming someone different, but rather about returning to who you have always been, before expectations, before masks, before social pressures. It's about reclaiming your essence and living with truth. When you understand this, the need for external approval loses its strength, and a new world opens up before you. A world where you are the protagonist of your own story. That doesn't mean there won't be challenges, but you now have the tools to face them consciously. You know that fear is not an enemy, but a sign that it is growing. He knows that the discomfort of change is temporary, but that the benefits of living authentically are forever. And above all, he knows that choosing himself has never been selfish, but rather a fundamental necessity for his emotional health. So, the question that remains is, are you ready to take this step? The answer doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be definitive. You just have to be willing to start, to take a first step, and then another and another. Because every conscious choice you make today is an investment in your future. If this content made sense to you, if it touched any part of your story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Together, we can transform the way we see life and, above all, how we see ourselves. Your journey starts now.